Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Bennett. I'm 30 years old. Until recently, I thought I knew exactly who I was building my future with. I was never the kind of woman who rushed into love. I didn't fall fast just because something felt exciting. I paid attention. I listened. I watched how people treated waiters, how they handled stress, how they spoke when they were disappointed, how they acted when no one was applauding them. Maybe that made me cautious. Maybe it made me slower than other women my age. But I had always believed that if I took my time, if I chose carefully enough, I could avoid the kind of heartbreak people spend years trying to recover from. That was why, when I got engaged, I didn't do it with doubt in the back of my mind. I did it with certainty, or at least what I thought was certainty. His name was Ethan. We had been together for almost 2 years, engaged for 6 months, and from the outside, we looked like one of those couples people quietly envied. Not flashy, not dramatic, not chaotic. We weren't the kind of pair who posted long declarations online or fought in restaurants or made other people uncomfortable at dinner parties. People used the same word for us over and over again. Stable. That was the word. And for a long time, I believed it. I thought stability meant safety. I thought calm meant honesty. I thought if a relationship looked mature from the outside, it probably was. But now I know better. Now I know that sometimes stability is just silence wearing nice clothes. Sometimes it only means the truth hasn't had its moment yet. Looking back, the warning signs were there. Not dramatic ones. Not the kind people in movies point at later and say, "How did you miss that?" No, they were smaller than that. Harder to explain. Harder to defend in real time. A shift in tone. A reaction that felt too sharp for the moment. A sentence that landed wrong and then disappeared before I could grab it. Ethan had a habit of stretching small disagreements until they felt heavier than they should have, and every time it happened, I found a way to excuse it. He's stressed. He didn't mean it like that. He's tired. This isn't a pattern. That last one was the lie I told myself most often. Because patterns don't announce themselves when they begin. They repeat quietly. They wait for you to normalize them. At first, it was little things. If dinner reservations changed, he acted as if I had ruined the whole night. If I asked a simple question about a bill, he heard criticism. If I wanted to visit my father instead of spending every Sunday with his side of the family, his voice would go cool in a way that didn't match the conversation. Never shouting. That would have been easier to understand. Ethan almost never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had learned something more effective. Precision. That was the thing about him. When he wanted to hurt a moment, he didn't throw plates. He chose words carefully. He made you feel like the room had tilted, and somehow it was your fault for losing your balance. Still, I stayed with the version of him I wanted to believe in. The version who held doors open for strangers. The version who brought me coffee when I worked late. The version who kissed my forehead while I was half asleep and whispered that he couldn't wait to marry me. Those moments were real too. That was the confusing part. People like him don't survive on cruelty alone. If they did, no one would stay. No one would say yes. I did say yes, and for months after that, I wore my engagement ring like proof that I had made the right choice. Our apartment looked like a place where good things were supposed to happen. Warm lighting, cream walls, a narrow bookshelf we built together and argued over for an entire Saturday because one of the screws had gone in crooked. A framed photo from a weekend trip by the lake. 2 coffee mugs that never matched because he kept breaking his and replacing them with whatever he found first. There was a softness to our life that made it easier to ignore the edges. That evening started like any other weekday. Nothing dramatic, no storm outside, no shattered glass, no ominous music the way stories pretend danger always arrives. I came home tired, dropped my bag by the chair near the entryway, and kicked off my shoes. Ethan was already there, standing in the kitchen, one hand resting against the counter, the other holding his phone. The overhead light cut across his face at an angle that made him look more tired than usual. "You're late," he said. "Not angry, just flat." "I texted you," I replied, walking toward the fridge. Traffic was bad. I saw. There was something in that answer that made me glance up. Not the words, the space around them. I opened the fridge, stared inside, and asked, "Did you still want to go to your sister's on Saturday, or did you want to switch and see my dad first?" That should have been an ordinary question. Instead, he let out a quiet breath through his nose, like I had already exhausted him. "We already talked about this." "No," I said, turning toward him. "We talked about both options. I was just asking what you decided." He looked at me for a second too long. "You do this all the time, Julia." I frowned. "Do what?" Act like things are open for discussion after they're already settled. That didn't make sense. Not in the context of the question, not in the tone of the day. I could feel the first small thread of confusion tighten inside me, but I kept my voice calm. I wasn't reopening anything, I said. I was asking. He set his phone down on the counter with exaggerated care. Exactly. I remember staring at him, thinking that word didn't answer anything. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The hum of the refrigerator sounded louder. Outside the window, the late sunlight had already started fading into a dull gray blue, and for some reason, that change in the sky made everything inside feel sharper. Ethan, I said, softer this time, why are you talking to me like this? His expression shifted. Not louder, not more emotional, just colder. That was always the most unsettling version of him. Not when he seemed angry, when he seemed deliberate. Because I'm tired of pretending this only happens by accident, he said. I leaned back slightly against the counter, stunned. Pretending what happens? He laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. You always find a way to make everything about what you want. It was such a strange accusation that for a second I genuinely thought I had missed something. I replayed the last minute in my mind. My question, his answer, my tone, his posture, all of it. I was searching for the normal doorway back into the conversation, the one where misunderstandings get cleared up and two people remember they're on the same side. But I couldn't find it, because he wasn't on that side anymore. That was the first real feeling. Not fear yet, not even anger. Recognition. Something was off, and not in the casual way couples sometimes get off track. This felt shaped, directed, like he had stepped into a script I hadn't been given. That's not what this is about, I said carefully. Yes, it is, he replied at once. Too fast, too clean, no reflection, no pause, no attempt to solve anything. That was when I realized he wasn't trying to de-escalate. He wasn't even arguing in the normal sense. He was building toward something, and I could feel it without understanding it yet. I folded my arms, less for defense than to keep myself steady. Then tell me what this is actually about. He looked at me, straight at me, calm, measuring. And in that moment, standing in the kitchen we had painted together, with the dishes still drying near the sink and my purse still where I had dropped it by the door, I felt something I still struggle to explain. It was the feeling of being watched by someone who had already made a decision. Not about the conversation, about me. He picked up his phone again, turned it once in his hand, then set it back down. A small movement, but it made my stomach tighten, because suddenly I knew, with the kind of instinct that arrives before evidence, that whatever happened next was not going to stay small. I wish I could say I understood what was happening right away. I didn't. That would have made it easier. Easier to react. Easier to protect myself. Easier to stop the night before it split my life into a before and an after. But that is the thing about moments like this. They don't always arrive looking violent. Sometimes they arrive wearing the face of a normal conversation, and only later do you realize you were standing on the edge of something designed to break beneath you. I kept looking at Ethan, trying to match the man in front of me with the man I thought I knew. The same face, the same voice, the same quiet posture. But there was something missing from him now, and once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. Warmth. Even when we argued before, there had at least been some trace of emotion behind it. Frustration, defensiveness, irritation. Something human, something messy. But this felt stripped down, controlled, as if he had already rehearsed the outcome and was simply waiting for me to move into the correct position. I forced myself to stay calm. What exactly are you accusing me of? I asked. He tilted his head, like the answer should have been obvious. You know what you do. No, I said more firmly. I don't. That's why I'm asking. His jaw shifted once. This is what I mean. You push, and then when I react, you act confused. I stared at him. I could feel my heart beat in my throat now, not because I was scared yet, but because I was trying so hard not to lose my footing. The conversation kept slipping sideways. Every sentence I offered came back distorted. It was like throwing a rope to someone and watching them use it to tie a knot around your wrists. I asked you about Saturday, I said. That's all I asked. You never just ask, he said. There it was again. Another sentence that sounded meaningful until you held it up to the light. I let out a breath, slow and controlled. Okay, then explain it to me. He looked away for a moment, toward the window over the sink, where the last of the daylight had almost disappeared. His reflection floated faintly in the glass, pale and ghost-like over the darkening city beyond it. When he turned back to me, his eyes had gone flat. "I'm tired of how you talk to me," he said. My mouth parted slightly. "How I talk to you?" "Yes." His answers had become shorter now, cleaner, like pieces placed in order. I took one step back from the counter, not in fear, but because I suddenly needed space between us. "Ethan, I haven't yelled. I haven't insulted you. I asked one question." He gave a small shrug. "You're doing it now." A chill moved through me. There was no way to answer that without stepping deeper into whatever trap he was laying. If I defended myself, that became proof I was aggressive. If I stayed quiet, he would fill the silence with whatever story he wanted next. And for the first time that night, I heard my own thoughts separate from the moment. "Be careful." The apartment had gone unnaturally still. The dishwasher clicked softly in the background. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded and faded. My purse was still on the chair by the door, half open, my keys barely visible inside. Every ordinary thing in that room suddenly looked strange to me, as if I were seeing it from a distance I had not chosen. "I think we both need to calm down," I said. That should have lowered the temperature. Instead, his mouth curved into the faintest smile. Not kind, not relieved, just satisfied. "See," he said. "There it is." I felt my spine go rigid. "There what is?" That tone. I almost laughed then. Not because anything was funny, but because the sheer unreality of it scraped against my nerves. Tone? I was being accused of tone now? I looked at him, really looked at him, and something sharp rose inside me. Not panic. Clarity. "You're twisting this," I said quietly. His eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed measured. "I'm not twisting anything." "Yes, you are." The words came out before I could soften them. Not loud, not reckless, but firm enough that the room seemed to change around us. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then he reached for his phone. I felt it instantly, the way an animal must feel a storm before it breaks. Every nerve in my body snapped awake. "What are you doing?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He unlocked the screen, glanced at it, then looked back at me with that same horrifying calm. "I don't have to keep dealing with this," he said. Something cold slid down my back. "Dealing with what?" He inhaled once, like he was exhausted by my refusal to understand. "You." I stepped away from the counter fully now. "Ethan, stop!" But he was already scrolling. There is a kind of fear that comes from danger, and then there is another kind that comes from realizing the danger has been standing in front of you, smiling, for a very long time. This was the second kind. The more I watched him, the more I understood that he was not improvising. He was not making a desperate choice in the middle of an emotional fight. He had crossed into something deliberate, and I was only just catching up. "What are you doing?" I repeated. This time he answered, "I'm done letting you make me feel unsafe in my own home." The words hit me so hard that for a second I couldn't process them. Unsafe? I actually looked behind me, absurdly, as if there might be another person in the room he was referring to. Then I looked back at him, waiting for the moment he would admit this had gone too far, that he was being cruel, that he was trying to scare me. It never came. "Are you serious?" I whispered. His thumb hovered over the screen. "Maybe if someone else deals with you, you'll finally listen." My stomach dropped so suddenly it made me feel dizzy. "No." I took another step forward. "No, don't do that." He lifted one hand, almost lazily, signaling me to stay back. "Don't come closer." I froze. Not because I had been rushing at him. I hadn't. I was still several feet away. But the way he said it, sharp enough to create a record in the air, made me understand what he was doing. He wasn't talking only to me anymore. He was beginning to talk for whoever would hear this later. My mouth went dry. "Ethan," I said, forcing each word out evenly. "Put the phone down." He tapped the screen. Then he raised it to his ear. I will never forget the sound of those first seconds. Not his voice, the silence before it. The dead space where my brain was still begging reality to correct itself, still begging him to stop before this became real. And then he said it. His name, our address. His voice low, controlled, almost shaken in exactly the way a person would expect fear to sound. He told the dispatcher he was scared. He told them I was escalating. He told them he didn't know what I might do. I felt the room tilt. "Are you insane?" I said, and then immediately hated the words, because I could hear how they would sound against the story he was creating. His gaze flicked toward me, and I saw it then. Not fear, not uncertainty. Triumph. He turned slightly away from me, still speaking into the phone. He described me as unstable, said I had been threatening, said he needed someone there before things got worse. I stood there in stunned silence, my hands trembling at my sides, and the most sickening part was how cleanly it all fit together. His tone, his phrases, his timing. The way he had kept pushing and reframing until the moment I protested, so he could package that protest as danger. I wanted to grab the phone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout the truth into the receiver so loudly whoever was on the other end would hear the absurdity of it. But another instinct cut through all of that. Don't move. Don't give him anything. So I stood absolutely still. My heart hammered so hard it hurt, but I kept my voice low. This is a lie. He covered the phone for half a second and looked at me with a stare so cold it almost emptied the air from my lungs. Not anymore, he said. Then he returned to the call. I do not know how long it lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe less. Time had stopped behaving normally. Every second stretched so wide it felt impossible to cross. He nodded once or twice, answered questions I couldn't hear, then finally ended the call and set the phone back down on the counter. The silence afterward was worse, because now there was nothing left to pretend. I looked at him as if I had never seen him before. You just called the police on me, I said. He didn't answer. You lied. Still nothing. The man who used to bring me coffee when I worked late leaned one hip against our kitchen counter and said, in a tone so flat it almost passed for boredom, maybe this will teach you to stop. A pulse of disbelief went through me so strong it felt like pain. Stop what? He looked at me with open contempt now, pushing people until they break and then acting innocent. My eyes burned, but not from tears, from shock, from fury held so tightly it had nowhere to go. That is not what happened here. He shrugged again. That shrug. I think I will hate that shrug for the rest of my life. I backed away from him, one slow step at a time, until the edge of the dining table brushed against the back of my leg. The apartment no longer felt like mine. The framed photo by the lake, the folded throw blanket on the sofa, the ring on my finger. All of it looked staged now, like props left behind after the truth had already gone home. I remember thinking very clearly, he has done this in his head before. Maybe not this exact version, maybe not tonight in every detail, but the logic of it, the shape of it, the confidence of it, none of that was new. No one invents this kind of cruelty from nothing in a single moment. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to ask how long he had hated me. I wanted to ask whether any part of our life together had been real. But none of those questions mattered anymore. There are moments when curiosity dies on contact with survival. This was one of them. So instead I asked the only thing left. Why are you doing this? And for the first time all evening, something flickered across his face. Not guilt, not shame, annoyance, as if the question itself were inconvenient. He looked at the front door, then back at me. Because no one ever takes this seriously until someone else gets involved. That sentence sat between us like poison. Someone else gets involved. Not because he was afraid, because he wanted witnesses, authority, consequence. He wanted the machinery of public judgment turned on me, and he wanted to stand beside it looking reasonable. My hands had gone cold. Outside, I heard it then. Faint at first. So faint I almost thought I imagined it. A car door slamming. Voices. The crackle of a radio. Ethan straightened, and in that tiny movement, I saw the final piece. He wasn't nervous they were coming. He had been waiting for them. The knock didn't come immediately. That was the worst part. There was a stretch of silence after I heard the car doors, after the low murmur of voices outside, where everything inside the apartment seemed to hold its breath. The air felt heavier, the walls closer. Even the faint hum of electricity in the ceiling lights sounded too loud. Ethan didn't move. He just stood there, near the kitchen counter, watching me, waiting. That was when it finally settled into my bones. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an emotional overreaction. It was a plan that had already reached its final step. Then came the knock. Sharp. Authoritative. Not aggressive, but not gentle either. The kind of knock that doesn't ask to be let in. The kind that assumes it will be. My heart slammed hard against my ribs, but I didn't move right away. Neither did he. For half a second we just stood there, the sound echoing faintly through the apartment, until he tilted his head slightly toward the door. Well, he said quietly, are you going to get that? The casualness of it made my stomach twist. I walked forward slowly, each step feeling unreal, like I was moving through someone else's memory. My fingers brushed the edge of the table, then the back of the chair, grounding myself in objects that still felt solid, even if nothing else did. Another knock, louder this time. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the handle for a fraction of a second. There was a part of me, small, desperate, irrational, that still believed if I opened it, I could explain everything. That I could speak calmly, clearly, and someone would see the truth immediately. I opened the door. 2 officers stood in the hallway, neutral expressions, alert eyes. hands resting near their belts but not drawn. Professional. Controlled. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice even, "we received a call from this residence." I nodded once, my throat tight. "Yes, that was—" "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. They entered with measured movements, scanning the space quickly. Their eyes moved over the furniture, the kitchen, the hallway, and then landed on Ethan. "Sir," the other officer said, "you made the call." Ethan shifted his posture immediately, and I swear to you, if I hadn't been standing there watching him, I wouldn't have believed how fast it happened. His shoulders dropped slightly. His expression tightened. His voice changed. "Yes," he said, stepping forward just enough to meet them halfway. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." I felt something inside me crack. That voice, that careful, controlled vulnerability. It was perfect. "She's been escalating," he continued, gesturing toward me without looking directly at me. "I tried to calm things down, but she just kept pushing, and I started to feel unsafe." Unsafe. There it was again. Packaged, delivered, ready to be believed. I opened my mouth. "That's not— Ma'am," one officer said gently, but firmly, lifting a hand slightly toward me. "We'll hear from you in a moment." In a moment, but not first. Not equally. I could feel it already. The subtle shift in alignment. Not because they were malicious, not because they had chosen a side out of bias, but because they had arrived with a narrative already in motion, and he had positioned himself perfectly inside it. "I didn't touch him," I said, forcing the words out evenly. "There was no threat. This is—" "Did you feel threatened, sir?" the officer asked, turning back to Ethan. Ethan hesitated. "Just enough. Just long enough to make it look real." "Yes," he said quietly. That was it. That single word carried more weight than everything I had said. I could see it happen. The mental shift. The invisible box being drawn around me, not as a person in a disagreement, but as a possible problem to contain. My pulse roared in my ears. "This is not true," I said again, my voice tighter now, despite everything I was doing to control it. "He's lying." This started over a normal conversation. "Ma'am," the second officer said, more firmly this time, "we need you to step back for a moment." Step back. Every instruction was small, reasonable, procedural, and every one of them moved me further out of control. I took a step back, then another. My hands were shaking now, and I hated that he could see it. Hated that it could be folded into whatever story he had already built. The officer spoke quietly with him for another minute. I couldn't hear everything, but I didn't need to. I could see the rhythm of it, him explaining, them clarifying, heads nodding, notes forming. Then one of them turned back to me. "Ma'am," he said, "we're going to need you to turn around." The words didn't make sense at first. "I'm sorry, what?" "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a second, the room went completely silent. Not physically, but inside me. "No," I said, the word coming out almost automatically. "No, there's no reason for that. I didn't do anything." "Ma'am, based on the call and what we've been told, we need to separate the situation and ensure everyone's safety." Safety? That word again. Used like a shield. Used like a weapon. I looked at Ethan. Just for a second, and he didn't look away. He didn't even try to hide it. There was no fear in his eyes. No doubt. Just a cold, steady satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "I'm not a threat," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it. "You're making a mistake." "Ma'am," the officer repeated, more firmly now, "please turn around." There are moments in life where you realize resistance will only make things worse. Where every instinct to fight, to argue, to push back will be used against you. This was one of those moments. Slowly, I turned. My hands moved behind my back, fingers trembling, and for a split second, I closed my eyes. Not in defeat, in control. Because if I lost control now, he would win completely. Cold metal closed around my wrists. The sound of the cuffs clicking into place echoed louder than anything else in the room. I inhaled sharply. It wasn't pain. It was the reality of it. This was happening. This was real. "Watch your step," one of the officers said as they guided me toward the door. Guided, not dragged, not forced. Everything still calm, still procedural, still reasonable. That was what made it so terrifying. I walked. Past the table, past the couch, past the framed photo by the lake. And then, as I reached the doorway, I heard his voice behind me. Low, soft, only meant for me. "Have fun explaining this." I stopped, just for a fraction of a second, and turned my head slightly, enough to see him, leaning casually against the counter, like nothing important had just happened. Like this was just another evening. But there was something else now, something clearer. Cruelty stripped of disguise. That was the moment everything inside me went still. Not broken, not shattered. Still, because whatever this was, whatever he thought he had just done, he had miscalculated. I didn't say another word as they led me out into the hallway. Neighbors' doors were closed, but I could feel it. The awareness, the curiosity, the quiet attention behind walls. The kind of attention that spreads later in whispers, in glances, in half-questions. Outside, the air felt colder. The flashing lights painted everything in red and blue. For a second, I tilted my head up, letting the night air hit my face, grounding myself in something that wasn't him, wasn't this apartment, wasn't the lie he had just built around me. They guided me toward the car, opened the back door. I ducked slightly and stepped inside. The door shut with a solid final sound. And in the silence that followed, sitting there with my hands restrained and my entire life tilting into something unrecognizable, I focused on one thing. One single, precise decision. I still had one call, and I knew exactly who I was going to make it to. The station was colder than I expected. Not just the air, though that too, sharp and dry against my skin, but the feeling of it. Clean. Controlled. Every sound contained within hard surfaces and fluorescent light. The kind of place where everything is recorded, labeled, processed, and nothing is supposed to be uncertain. Except I was. They walked me through a set of double doors, the sound of them clicking shut behind me, echoing louder than it should have. My heels tapped faintly against the floor, each step too loud in my own ears. "Right this way," one of the officers said. Still polite, still calm, still treating me like a situation instead of a person. I didn't resist. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything else. Because by the time we reached the front desk, I had already made the decision. I would not give Ethan anything more to use. They sat me down, asked basic questions. Name, address, confirmation. My voice came out steady, almost detached, like I was listening to someone else answer for me. Julia Bennett, 30 years old, engaged, or at least I had been. The word felt wrong now, like it belonged to a different version of my life that had ended somewhere between the kitchen and the sound of handcuffs closing around my wrists. One of the officers removed the cuffs briefly to process paperwork, then secured them again. Procedure. Everything was procedure. "Do you need to make a call?" the woman behind the desk asked. That was the first moment I looked directly at someone. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake this time. Not even a little. She nodded once and slid a phone toward me. "Make it quick." I picked it up, and for the first time since this started, my fingers hesitated. Not because I didn't know who to call, because I knew exactly what would happen when I did. There are people you call for comfort, people you call for advice, and then there are people you call when the situation itself needs to change. I dialed. It rang once, twice. Then, "Julia?" His voice, calm, focused, already alert. "Dad," I said. I didn't cry. I didn't rush. I didn't explain everything at once. "I need you," I said. There was a pause. Short, measured. "Where are you?" "At the station," I replied. "They brought me in after a call from Ethan. He said I was unstable, that I threatened him." Silence. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Assessment. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Did you threaten him?" "No." Another pause. Slightly longer. "I'm coming," he said. The line went dead. No reassurance. No panic. Just action. I lowered the phone slowly and placed it back on the counter. And then I waited. Time inside a police station doesn't move the same way it does outside. It stretches. It folds. Every minute feels longer than it should, but also somehow indistinct, like it could have been 10 minutes or an hour, and you wouldn't know the difference. People moved around me. Officers walked past, voices low. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. The world continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But there was a shift. Subtle. At first, I thought I imagined it. A glance that lingered a second too long. A conversation that stopped when someone looked in my direction. The woman at the desk checked her computer, then checked it again. And then, the front doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the air changed, even before I saw him. My father walked in like he always did. Not rushing, not hesitating, just present. Tall, composed, every movement deliberate, like he had already measured the room before stepping into it. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the room, at the officers, at the desk, and then he walked forward. "Good evening," he said. His voice carried just enough to be heard clearly without ever rising. "I'm looking for my daughter." The woman behind the desk straightened slightly. "Yes, sir." "Julia Bennett," he added. Now he looked at me. And in that moment, everything inside me steadied. Not because I was saved. Not yet. But because I was no longer alone inside a story I didn't control. He turned back to the desk. I'd like to understand why she's here. The tone was polite, but precise. The kind of tone that doesn't ask casually. It asks because it expects an answer. Sir, the officer said carefully, we responded to a domestic disturbance call. The reporting party stated, I'm aware of what was stated, my father interrupted gently. Not aggressive, not dismissive, just exact. I'm asking what was verified. The difference landed immediately. I could see it in the slight shift of posture, in the hesitation, in the way the explanation that had sounded sufficient a moment ago suddenly required more structure. Well, the officer said, choosing his words, based on the report and the situation when we arrived, we made the decision to bring her in to ensure safety. Safety for whom? My father asked. Still calm, still controlled. But now the room had gone quieter. For the reporting party, the officer replied. My father nodded once. And what evidence supported the claim that my daughter posed a threat? There it was, the question. Simple, direct, unavoidable. Silence stretched, not long, but long enough. We, the officer began, then stopped, recalibrating. We made a judgment based on the information provided at the scene. My father considered that. Then he spoke again. No visible injuries? No, sir. No prior incidents on record? Not that we are aware of. No independent witness statements? A pause. No, sir. The air shifted again, this time heavier, because now the structure of the story, the one Ethan had built so carefully, was being examined piece by piece. And it wasn't holding. My father nodded once more. Then he turned his head slightly toward me. Remove the restraints, he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. But it wasn't a suggestion. The officer hesitated, just for a second, then stepped forward. The metal around my wrists clicked open. And for the first time since this began, I felt my hands free. I didn't move right away. I just sat there, letting the feeling return slowly, like circulation coming back after being cut off. My father turned back to the desk. Now, he said, his tone unchanged, I would like to speak with the individual who made the report. The room was completely still now, because everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't over. It had just changed direction. And somewhere, back in the apartment, he thought he still controlled. Ethan was about to find out. The drive back felt shorter. Not because it was, because everything inside me had sharpened. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands resting loosely in my lap now, the faint red marks around my wrists still visible under the dim glow of passing streetlights. My father drove without turning on the radio, his focus steady, his expression unreadable. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Some conversations happen before words are ever said. By the time we pulled up in front of the apartment, I already knew what this moment was going to be. Not closure. Not yet. Exposure. The building looked exactly the same. That was the strange part. The same lights in the hallway. The same quiet hum of evening life behind closed doors. The same door at the end of the corridor. But I wasn't the same person walking toward it. And whatever version of Ethan was waiting behind that door, he had no idea what was about to walk in. My father knocked. Once. Firm. Measured. No urgency. No hesitation. The door opened. Ethan stood there, and for a split second, just a fraction of a second, his expression didn't match the version of events he had created. Surprise. It flickered across his face before he could catch it. Then it was gone, replaced by something smoother, controlled, carefully arranged. Sir, he said, straightening slightly, I assume you're here because of what happened earlier. I was just trying to... My name, my father said calmly, stepping forward just enough to interrupt without raising his voice, is not relevant right now. Ethan stopped, just for a beat, and in that beat I saw it, the first crack. I'd like you to walk me through exactly what happened, my father continued. No accusation. No anger. Just a request, but not the kind you refuse. Ethan glanced at me briefly, then back at my father, and he began. She came home already upset, he said. I tried to talk to her, but she kept pushing. It escalated, and I started to feel like I didn't have control of the situation anymore. I didn't want it to get worse, so I called for help. The same story, same tone, same structure, delivered just as cleanly as before. If I hadn't lived through it, I might have believed it too. My father listened without interrupting, didn't nod, didn't react, just absorbed. And when Ethan finished, there was a small pause. Quiet. Heavy. Then my father asked the only question that mattered. Can you prove any of that? It landed like a dropped glass. Ethan blinked. Once. Twice. It's what happened, he said, a slight edge creeping into his voice. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't serious. That wasn't my question, my father replied. Still calm. Still exact. Do you have any evidence that supports your claim that she threatened you? Silence. Not long, but long enough. Ethan shifted his weight. Well, no, not physical evidence, but... No recordings, my father asked. No. No messages? No. No witnesses? Ethan hesitated. No. Each answer made the room smaller, tighter, like the walls were inching closer with every word he couldn't provide. My father nodded once, then took a step into the apartment, just enough to change the balance of the space. And yet, he said, you made a formal report that resulted in her being detained. Ethan's jaw tightened. I was trying to protect myself. From what? The question came faster this time. Sharper, not louder, but closer. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time since this started, he didn't have a ready answer. And that was when I saw it. Not the man I thought I knew. Not even the version of him from earlier that night. Something weaker. Something scrambling. I felt threatened, he repeated, but the words didn't land the same way anymore. They sounded thinner, like they had been stretched too far. My father studied him for a moment, then asked, almost casually, "Did she touch you?" "No." "Raise her voice?" Ethan hesitated again. "Not exactly, but..." "Make any direct threat?" Another pause. "No." There it was. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just empty. The story had nothing behind it, and now everyone in the room could see it. Ethan's eyes flicked toward me, then back to my father. And something in his posture shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. The confidence was gone. "What is this?" he asked, a hint of irritation slipping through. "Are you interrogating me now?" "No," my father said. A small beat. "Yes." The word landed heavier than anything else he had said. Ethan straightened, defensive now. "This is ridiculous. I had every right to call." "You have every right to call," my father agreed smoothly. Another beat. "You do not have the right to fabricate." The word hung in the air. Fabricate. Ethan's expression hardened. "I didn't fabricate anything." My father didn't react. Didn't argue. Didn't push. He simply held the silence long enough for the weight of that statement to settle. Then he turned slightly toward me. "Julia," he said. I stepped forward, not shaking, not uncertain. "Just present." "Did you threaten him?" he asked. "No." "Did you behave in a way that would reasonably cause someone to fear for their safety?" "No." My answers were simple, clean, because the truth didn't need decoration. My father nodded once, then looked back at Ethan. "This ends here," he said. Quiet. Final. Ethan let out a short breath, almost a scoff. "Yeah, it should have ended before it got this far." My father tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. And for the first time, there was something else in his voice. Not anger. Not quite. But something colder. "It will end when the consequences of your actions are fully understood." That was the moment. The collapse. Not loud. Not explosive. But complete. Because Ethan finally realized this wasn't just a story anymore. It was a record. And records don't disappear just because you wish they would. His gaze shifted again. Faster now. Searching for something to hold on to. Control. Leverage. Anything. But there was nothing left. And for the first time since this began, he looked unsure. 2 months later, nothing looked the same. Not the apartment. Not the life I thought I had built. Not even the version of myself who once believed that stability meant safety. I moved out the same week. Not dramatically. Not in the middle of the night. I packed my things slowly, deliberately, piece by piece, as if I were documenting the end of something instead of running from it. The bookshelf we had argued over stayed behind. The extra coffee mugs, too. I took what was mine and left everything that felt like it belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. I didn't say goodbye to him. There was nothing left to say. After that night, communication didn't end all at once. At first, it came in controlled messages. Short. Measured. Like he was still trying to manage the narrative. I think things got out of hand. We both said things we didn't mean. "We should talk like adults." I read them. I didn't respond. Because the moment he called the police and lied, the relationship didn't just crack. It ended. Cleanly. Completely. What followed wasn't a breakup. It was distance. Legal. Emotional. Permanent. The report didn't disappear. That was the part he didn't seem to understand at first. Statements had been made. A record had been created. And once something like that exists, it doesn't vanish just because the story behind it starts to fall apart. He tried to soften it, tried to reframe it, tried to suggest that it had been a misunderstanding. But misunderstandings don't sound like rehearsed fear. They don't come with carefully chosen words. They don't position one person as a threat and the other as a victim with that level of precision. And eventually, even he stopped trying. I heard things later. Not from him, from people who had been around him. His version of events didn't hold up when it had to be repeated more than once. Details shifted. Timelines didn't align. The certainty he had that night started to dissolve the moment it had to exist outside the exact environment he controlled. That's the thing about lies. They can feel solid in the moment, but they don't travel well. Professionally, it followed him, quietly at first, then more clearly. Questions, doubt, distance. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just consequences. And those tend to last longer than the moment that creates them. As for me, I changed, not in a loud way, not in a way that would make a good speech or a clean, satisfying ending, but in the quiet places, the places where trust used to live without question. I don't ignore discomfort anymore. I don't explain away patterns just because they're subtle, and I don't confuse calm with kindness, because now I understand something I didn't before. Control doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks patient, measured, reasonable, right up until the moment it decides not to be. People ask me sometimes if I ever saw it coming, if there was a moment I should have known. The answer is yes. There were many moments. Small ones, easy to dismiss, easy to smooth over, easy to explain, until they weren't. If there's anything I learned from all of this, it's not about revenge. It's not about winning. It's about recognition, about understanding that the most dangerous person in your life is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one who knows exactly how to sound calm while they're setting the stage for you to fall. I still remember the way he looked at me in the kitchen that night. Not angry, not emotional, certain, like he had already decided who I was and who I would be in the story he was about to tell. What he didn't understand was that stories don't belong to the person who starts them. They belong to the truth, and the truth always takes longer, but it always arrives.